Operation Sindoor is by far, like I said, one of the most audacious retaliatory strikes against Pakistan. Here you're hitting Muridke, you're hitting Bahawalpur. It's almost striking at the heart of Pakistani terror establishment.
Yes. So Pakistan was, historically, if you go to see that the partition when that happens in 1947 is based on a negative premise.
An irrational fear.
An irrational fear that, a particular community will overpower another community. And that was why the two-nation theory, that's how it shaped out, and that's how the country was created. So from the day one of its creation, they have lived with this fear that, India, the Hindus primarily, are our enemies.
Yes.
That country was created on the basis of hate. Because of that militaristic nature of Pakistan, they will never want to have peace with India.
Right. The army is in power, whether de facto or de jure. They are always in power.
Army is always in power. It has been Pakistan's stated policy, especially since Zia-ul Haq's regime. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who said that when India tested in Pokhran the nuclear bomb, he just went so crazy about having a nuclear bomb of his own that he said that the people can eat grass for all I care, but in Pakistan will make a bomb. So they have always been in a adversarial position because, like Chandni said, the country itself was born out of hate for India, primarily Hindus.
Right.
Now the Delhi attack is slightly more complicated because it has been carried out, as we see in media reports and as it's unraveling slowly, by a terror module which is based in India. So these are Indians who are attacking other Indians. Although the links, the funding might be coming from the ISI, the links would be from Jaish-e-Mohammed or from Lashkar-e-Toiba. But these are people who are inside of India. You don't know who they are. They might be standing outside this building. They might be doctors we visit or our, relatives of our friends.
Right.
We have no idea who these people are, and they might be slowly getting radicalized.
Now I think we should start talking about these so-called sleeper cells is not sleeper cells but active cells.
Absolutely.
So that is something that and the entire approach needs to change, and I think there has been some change in the approach. The society in general, we need to keep a check on what our neighbor is doing. I mean, this is not it's not a joke, it's not a meme that we need to be like a CCTV camera. We actually need to be like a CCTV camera. It is important because we need to know what our neighbor is doing. We need to know what people around are doing.
Hello and welcome once again to Kitabi Baatein, a podcast where we make sense of India and the world through the medium of books. I'm your host Abhishek. Friends, in today's podcast episode, we'll talk about Operation Sindoor, an operation which started in the aftermath of the Pahalgam massacre and, as many say, is not over yet. We are talking Operation Sindoor 2.0, maybe 3.0 and beyond. But what exactly was Operation Sindoor? What exactly did India achieve? Was it something significant or was it just a blip? Did it really help India or it did not? Will there be Operation Sindoor 2.0? What exactly was Operation Sindoor's significance in India's diplomacy and defense? My guest today is Dr. Chandni Sengupta and Dr. Roshni Sengupta, who have written this beautiful book called Operation Sindoor, and they call it India's new normal. So let's discuss with them what exactly is India's new normal. Dr. Chandni, Dr. Roshni, pleasure to have you on Kitabi Baatein.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you.
I would like to tell the viewers they both are sisters, and interestingly, they both studied from the same college, the prestigious Lady Shri Ram College in Delhi. And Dr. Roshni teaches politics and Dr. Chandni, you teach history. And we met even once earlier as well when we talked about your previous book. So first of all, again, welcome both of you to the podcast. Operation Sindoor as India's new normal. We are seeing from 2014, India did retaliate against Pakistan in 2016 as well as in 2019. And in 2024, we had a third instance of a retaliation against Pakistan. So what is the difference you see in the approach and why you think Operation Sindoor is India's new normal?
So we did see, to answer your question, we did see that India started off with a ramped up approach to addressing terrorism after the Uri attacks.
Right.
And wherein we had the surgical strikes in 2016. In 2019, when Pulwama attack happened, we retaliated by Balakot, with Balakot airstrikes. In 2025, when Pahalgam massacre happens, which is an attack on civilians, if you also, notice the earlier attacks were against military establishments and military personnel.
Right.
But now in 2025, we have this audacious attack against civilians, Indian civilians, right, enjoying a holiday. And it is but natural that India, would ramp up its adversarial policy against Pakistan even more.
Yes.
And which is what you saw in Operation Sindoor. Well, we were expecting some sort of a retaliation or some sort of action going forward after 22nd April 2025 when Pahalgam happened. And when Operation Sindoor took place, it was by far the most aggressive stand that India has taken against organized cross-border terrorism.
Right.
So it is, why we call it the new normal is because Operation Sindoor is by far, like I said, one of the most audacious retaliatory strikes against Pakistan. There are some accounts which say that the Indian jets crossed over, while some accounts would maintain still that Indian jets did not cross over but hit the targets across the border. Whatever be the case, there are several, the reports are still pretty hazy about what happened. And in the book, we have tried to bring in as much clarity as possible. But there are some things which are just confined to military, sort of four walls of the military establishment, and you don't really have access to it. But what we have been able to piece together is that this was perhaps the most well-planned and well-executed anti-terror operations, wherein you are hitting the terror hubs and in mainland Pakistan. Right. In surgical strikes, you across the border, you hit their terror camps and you came back. Balakot, you again crossed the border, hit them and came back. But here you're hitting Muridke, you're hitting Bahawalpur. It's almost striking at the heart of Pakistani terror establishment. Yes. Right. So, Operation Sindoor in that way, in that sense, is like it's a watershed event that happens in India's contemporary history. And the book primarily tries to do that, to record this watershed event.
Right. So it primarily cemented India's position that if you do this to us, this is what our response will be.
Also the whole of government approach. So there was unity of purpose.
Yes.
And efficiency comes from there, comes from the unity of purpose. Everyone was determined to put in their best.
Right.
So whether it was the armed forces or the government or government agencies, they were all trying to pool in their best efforts. So the whole of government approach was also something that was something new.
Right.
And that also helped us in targeting so many of their air bases and so many of these terror camps prior to the actual military operation that happened. So that is why we've called it the new normal. And the Prime Minister himself also in his address to the nation mentioned that Operation Sindoor is India's new normal. This is the new strategy that we have developed. So which is primarily why, we believe that this is something that had never happened before. I mean, hitting targets like Bahawalpur and Muridke, we've been hearing since childhood that these are terror hotbeds.
Yes.
But we had never been able to probably gather the courage, or we did not have the vision to do it. But with Operation Sindoor, this was accomplished.
Right.
So that's also something important.
You mentioned a lot of history of Pakistan, and as we were saying, unfortunately, these attacks are not new in the history of India and Pakistan. Ever since the creation of Pakistan, starting from the Kashmir conflict, we have seen multiple attacks.
Right.
So, And as you talked a lot about Pakistan history, its creation, how do you think that is linked to the wars, the attacks India is facing? What is there in Pakistan's history origin, the reason for Pakistan's arrival, that it is still leading to a conflict between itself and India?
So Pakistan was, historically, if you go to see that the partition when that happens in 1947, is based on a negative premise.
An irrational fear.
An irrational fear that, a particular community will overpower another community. And that was why the two-nation theory, that's how it shaped out, and that's how the country was created. So from the day one of its creation, they have lived with this fear that, India, the Hindus primarily, are our enemies. So they have always considered us to be their enemy.
Right.
Though there was initially, we tried to kind of have this approach of friendship, and we tried a lot to kind of engage with them through dialogue. But whenever we've tried to do that, they have hit back. They've done a Kargil, or they've done they've kind of orchestrated a terror attack in India. So it has it has never helped us. Having a dialogue, though we believe in dialogue, that's been our civilizational ethics to believe in dialogue, to believe in multiculturalism and all of that, but it has never worked with Pakistan, because from its inception, it was based on hate.
Yes.
That country was created on the basis of hate. So, our leadership probably has not been able to understand the fact that a country which is based on hate, and the hate for a particular community, cannot ever, we can never have any sort of friendship with them.
Right.
So a lot of political leaders have said that, we cannot change our neighbors. But having said that, we need to deal with them in the language they understand.
They understand.
So that is very important. And the history of Pakistan, so the military establishment has always been very powerful there. In everything, they're in from property dealing to cornflakes to biscuits, they are everywhere. So
filmmaking as well.
Filmmaking as well. So they sponsor films, they sponsor TV series. They so their involvement in the entire political dispensation is quite a lot as compared to our country, where we are a democracy and a thriving democracy. So because of that militaristic nature of Pakistan, they will never want to have peace with India.
Right. The army is in power, whether de facto or de jure. They are always in.
Army is always in power. It has been Pakistan's stated policy, especially since Zia-ul Haq's regime, that because they cannot win a conventional war, they realized it very early. 1965, it was a misadventure, Operation Gibraltar, then again, of course, Operation Searchlight, 1971, again another misadventure. And they realized that, look, guys, we can't defeat these people conventionally.
Correct.
So let's do something here. Let's wage a proxy war against them. So bleed India with 1,000 cuts. Right. So prior to Zia, there was Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who said that when India tested in Pokhran the nuclear bomb, he just went so crazy about having a nuclear bomb of his own that he said that the people can eat grass for all I care, but in Pakistan will make a bomb. So they have always been in a adversarial position, because, like Chandni said, the country itself was born out of hate for India, primarily Hindus. Right. The entire edifice of that state structure is based on anti-Indianism. So to expect that they will have any love for India, or anything that they would like to have, all of it, whatever you see, any kind of Aman Ki Asha overtures that come from there, music, films, etc., whatever it is, it's very superficial.
Yes.
And, because military establishment has its tentacles into everything.
Right.
It's a military entertainment complex. So the films are made by the military. These are just absolute propaganda films, vehicles that are launched by the ministry. In fact, a lot of the Pakistani actors are funded, their careers have been funded by the military. So therefore, so India, and one thing that I wanted to add to what she was saying was that out of this hate and out of the fact that they were born out of this irrational fear of India, their Shatru Bodh is very strong.
Yes.
Unlike Indians,
and
our Shatru Bodh, unfortunately, is extremely weak. We have never had a very strong sense of who the adversary is.
Yes.
Neither in the case of Pakistan nor in the case of Bangladesh. Bangladesh, we thought for a longest time were our friends because we helped create it in 1971. But unfortunately, what you see in Bangladesh today is it's as bad of a failed state as Pakistan is, right? And as worse of a terrorist state as Pakistan is. Similarly, in the case of China, but the Chinese relations of India and China have sort of been blow hot, blow cold.
Yes.
But we, at this point in time, we are in a very, we are sort of in a precarious conflictual situation with both our eastern and western borders being hot right now. So the, India's new normal, like what we mentioned in the book as well, from Operation Sindoor, it is the recognition of the fact that we are in a position where we need to have Shatru Bodh. We really need to imbibe this idea of who the adversary is and how to deal with him.
Correct.
And without understanding the adversary, you can't deal with the adversary, which is why the Pakistan chapter is very important.
And we had enough of, this, they speak the same language, they eat the same food, they wear the same clothes. I mean, but let us look at it from their perspective.
Exactly.
Do they consider us
as their own?
As their own. Exactly. They do not. It's only hate.
Right.
So, because that country was born out of hate.
So this love is basically one-sided.
It is one-sided.
It's one-sided.
Exactly.
We believe that they are the same way. So they were the same people, but they look at their identity purely in terms of religion, which Indian society as such does not. We have a concept of nationalism, a national feeling, not only the religious one. So, and as you mentioned, Aman ki Ashna, the virtues that did not yield any fruit because the core ideology, it differs a lot between India and Pakistan. So, yeah, we did talk about history, and as you said, coming back to Operation Sindoor. So, if I play the devil's advocate here, it is said that we did, give a befitting reply to Pakistan. However, we can see that by the time we wrote this book and we're having this podcast, there was another attack in Delhi. So, there are many people who say that it did not yield any fruit. After all, Pakistan is still attacking us. In broad daylight, there are, bombs being, thrown, and we can't do anything. So what did Operation Sindoor achieve? Probably not much. So what's your take on that?
So Operation, just to link the Delhi blast to why Operation Sindoor is important and why things have changed, in our opinion, since Operation Sindoor. The very fact that we are talking about it in the way that we are at the moment, in the way that we want to understand where are these, what is the origin of terrorism in this region, where is the funding coming from. In fact, during Operation Sindoor, we've mentioned this in the book as well, there was an initial list of 21 hit points that the army had prepared, and they ultimately hit only 9. And the rest are still there. So we know who we are targeting. We know where these people are coming from. But Operation Sindoor was launched with very limited objectives. The limited objectives being that we hit you where you will bleed.
Yes.
Right? But we will not go overboard. My objective is not to capture POK. My objective is not to cross the Durand line and get into Afghanistan. My objective is not to separate Balochistan. No. My objective is primarily to avenge the death of my citizens, and in the way that you understand. And it might act as a deterrent to further attacks. Now, the Delhi attack is slightly more complicated because it has been carried out, as we see in media reports and as it's unraveling slowly, by a terror module which is based in India.
India.
So these are Indians who are attacking other Indians. Although the links, the funding might be coming from the ISI, the links would be from Jaish-e-Mohammed or from Lashkar-e-Toiba. But these are people who are inside of India. You don't know who they are. They might be standing outside this building. They might be doctors we visit or our, relatives of our friends.
Right.
We have no idea who these people are, and they might be slowly getting radicalized. But the whole awareness of how radicalization takes place. Who are these people? How can you sort of be careful of these people, or what can you do to, this whole conversation is new. This whole conversation did not happen, let's say 10 years ago.
Yes.
When, the, Mumbai, 26/11 happened. The conversation was about it being a false flag Hindu terror operation. Right?
That was indeed the idea of
response,
Pakistan.
Yes.
They were wearing the sacred thread which the Hindus
That's
wear.
what they wanted to do.
Right.
So the whole obfuscation game is now off. So people are slowly but surely understanding what is going on.
Yes.
And the internalization or the understanding of Shatru Bodh, of understanding your adversary, of knowing your adversary, is, I think, one of the most important takeaways of Operation Sindoor. Or whether or not Operation Sindoor 2.0 happens we'll see in the future.
Right.
In what form it might happen, again, we don't know. The preparations are up. But Pakistan, of course, knows that if it does something and if the links are proven to be true, they are up for trouble.
Right.
So that understanding has, of course, dawned on them. If you look at the kind of discussions that are taking place in the Pakistani media, there is a lot of ab karenge, tab karenge sort of a conversation.
Right.
Like sleepless nights, अब ये exercises कर रहे हैं, ये कर रहे हैं. So is it going to be in a week's time or 10 days time?
So they are becoming cognizant of the fact that India can,
exactly
retaliate. So we should be, ready after.
And one more thing that has happened is that this whole idea of non-state actors has collapsed.
Yes.
Right.
Now we know that it is a Pakistani state,
Right.
which is completely funding, supporting, pushing these people into India's borders, and they are behind it. Their military establishment is behind it, and the military establishment runs Pakistan. So it's the Pakistani state that is doing this.
Right.
So the non-state actor concept has completely collapsed.
Also, in the context of the Delhi blasts, the planning was going on since 2023.
Yes.
As per media reports. Also, now I think we should start talking about these so-called sleeper cells. Is not sleeper cells, but active cells.
Absolutely.
So that is something that, and the entire approach needs to change. And I think there has been some change in the approach. So the NIA is going after them. It has gone after Al Falah University, and many other, actors. There's been another cache of arms that, were caught day before yesterday. So, I mean, we have become more active in that sense. Our, security establishment is not lying low.
Right.
As compared to, when 26/11 happened, or the Delhi bomb blast happened earlier in Sarojini Nagar.
Yes.
And at that time. So we have ramped up our approach. So that is important. And we should, again, coming back to the idea of Shatru Bodh, we need to understand that these sleeper cells are not sleeper cells. They are active, and they are being funded by Pakistan. They are being funded by the ISI. And so that the entire network has to be busted.
Yes.
It'll take some time. And I think we also need more people on the ground.
Right.
But it is happening. There's and it's not only all talk. There is on-ground operations that are taking place.
So a related question to this, and once again I'm playing the devil's advocate, was this attack intelligence failure? Because we knew that Pakistan would retaliate after Operation Sindoor, and yet we could not avoid this. So was in some way a weakness of our system that we could not trace it before it happened?
No, we did trace it before it happened because we did catch hold of the
explosives and
explosives
Right.
and the planners. And if we had not done that, then probably more people would have died. So it was not an entire failure. Entirely, I would not say that it was a complete failure, but I mean, we should have kind of caught hold of this person, this suicide bomber also. But I think our intelligence agencies have saved more lives. Many more lives would have been lost.
Right.
So the fact that this attack perhaps seems like a panic sort of a reaction
Yes.
because he was on the run.
Yes.
And the reason that he was on the run was because the J&K police, the Haryana police, and the UP police had conducted those raids and caught hold of all that ammonium nitrate that Dr. Muzammil and Dr. Adil and Dr. Shaheen had stored. For what good reason, only they can tell us, and we can imagine for what good reason, of course. So there's a lot of talk about 32 cars being employed as potential bombs with all this explosive, and so Umar Nabi got away and probably panicked a bit.
Yes.
And therefore blew up. So loss of 15 lives is really painful and saddening. But we really have to also give credit where it's due to our intelligence in agencies that they really saved a lot of lives, given the fact that they have limited manpower. And but like Chandni had mentioned earlier, the whole of government approach. So what is the establishment is very serious about tackling the issue. It's not brushing it under the carpet as it used to happen before. We have to be very clear about the fact that there is a sea change in the way we look at national security.
That's true.
And national security threats.
Very true. This reminds me of a quote by the former RAW head Vikram Sood, and he said that the intelligence people are actually known by their failures. If they succeed somewhere, you won't know the names. But if they fail, you actually know the names.
And the terrorist has to succeed only once.
Only once. Very true. Yeah, but I agree that, it's not exactly a failure, but of course we now know who the enemy is. And when you said the new normal, I think one other thing which characterizes the new normal is that I remember during the time of 26/11, there was a lot of blame was being passed on to RSS. There were even book launches which about, this being an RSS conspiracy, something which was proven very well. It was nothing to do with RSS, and it was a conspiracy by Pakistan. So coming to again Operation Sindoor, I think one of the characteristics of Operation Sindoor is India's diplomacy, which was absolutely clear about, the message it wanted to convey. Instead of talking about the Aman Ki Asha, and was saying that the common history and everything, or basically from the Kadi Ninda, we have moved to criticizing Pakistan openly, whether we see in the UN or whether the Honorable Minister, giving a speech. So one of the characteristics was the much changed Indian diplomacy and also India's military prowess, which was very much visible. So what's your take on these 2 points?
So if we look at India's philosophy in terms of diplomacy, leadership or netritva, as we call it, it has never been about hegemony.
Yeah.
It has never been about domination. It has always been about upholding dharma.
Yes.
Right. And maintaining the social order, maintaining the cosmic order. So we've always, believed in following this policy of Madhyam Marg. Right. And dialogue. Right. So this entire concept of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah, universal well-being, that has been our approach. So historically, as a student of history, if I look at it from, say, Ashoka's perspective, right? So he gave up Bhairi Ghosha and he started practicing Dhamma Ghosha. So we need to, look at it from that perspective. Also, Shivaji's approach. He took up arms against the Mughals, but he also wanted to create a state based on dharma. So our policy has been twofold. Or at one end of the spectrum, we have shown our power, Shakti, and at another end of the spectrum, we have also shown our discernment,
yes,
Vivek. Right. But then we also have the philosophy and the writings of Chanakya, the Arthashastra, where he has very clearly said that if push comes to shove, we need to follow Sam, Dam, Dand, Bhed.
Yes.
So with Pakistan and with any of our enemies, Bangladesh now, China, with Pakistan in particular, and with what happened in Pahalgam on the 22nd of April, I think, we were forced to, keep our philosophy of Madhyam Marg and keep our philosophy of Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah on one side and practice Sam, Dam, Dand, Bhed and teach them a lesson. So it was necessary, it was needed, and we did it.
Right.
And when our objective was achieved, we stepped back.
Yes.
So that is something, from the civilizational point of view, I feel we have always followed Madhyam Marg. We have always, looked at, this entire concept of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. The whole world is a family, universal well-being. We do not want to practice hegemony. We do not want to be a dominating power in South Asia or in the world, but we just want to live in peace.
Correct.
But when our neighbors do not want us to live in peace and they've been inflicting injury on us, we need to react. And that is when I think Chanakya Niti is, the principles of Chanakya Niti come in. And it is important that we also, follow those principles, and which we have during Operation Sindoor. Yeah.
This is pretty much what we did when we sent out the delegations.
Yeah.
And I think they quite successfully conveyed the message
Yes.
of India still not being a hegemonizing power. We have no intentions of breaking up anybody's country or taking over anything or anywhere from, on both sides of our neighborhood. But if you hit us, we'll hit you back harder.
Correct.
Right? So, that is India's policy even now. We've constantly followed what we know as a cold start policy. So we don't really give any, we are not the ones waging wars. We are not the ones, we don't follow the hot start, policy, doctrine.
Yeah.
But then the Prime Minister and the other members of the ministry, the Home Minister and the Raksha Mantri as well, have been very clearly mentioning in several of their public, speeches and so on that we will not buckle down to nuclear blackmail anymore. Yes. Which was the case in the past. Well, we probably didn't buckle down to nuclear blackmail. We kind of didn't react to it. Yeah. What Operation Sindoor has changed is the fact that Pakistan also now is of the opinion, is aware that, guys, these people they're not pushovers. So, do whatever you want, but do it in a way that doesn't directly link us to them. Otherwise, we'll have hell to pay.
Right.
Noor Khan and Rahim Yar Khan are still not operational.
Right.
So the damage we inflicted on them, particularly in the morning of 10th May, and the cease pause was announced later, was immense. And Pakistan, the Air Force was announcing tenders after tenders for the marammat of, the damage that we inflicted on them. But those two air bases are still not operational. And yesterday, of course, they were all laughing at Tejas, the unfortunate incident that happened at the Dubai Air Show. Yeah. But guys, just look in your backyard. Like, what has happened? Two of your big, and Noor Khan is the pride of the Pakistani military. Still not operational. Right. At least one runway is completely damaged.
Definitely.
And so
there's a gaping.
There is, and so they know that India, at least under Modi ji's leadership, is not going to lie low, not going to do an Operation Parakram, come on the borders, stand on the borders and do nothing.
Which was happened after the parliament attack.
Yes, which happened after the parliament attack. And we are internally going after, so the spy ring, as is mentioned in the book, the spy ring was busted. But who is to say that perhaps was not the only spy ring? Yeah. There might be others. Then, of course, you have the recent development of the Delhi blast and the entire conspiracy around it. So in terms of diplomacy, I think we conveyed our message pretty solidly to the world. That these were our objectives, very limited objectives, and we don't want to hegemonize. We have no ambitions of any sort. People, there was so much talk on social media about POK le aao, yahi mauka hai, Baluchistan tod do, idhar udhar Durand line tak aap chale jaiye. But हमारा objective वो था ही नहीं. Right. It wasn't our objective at all. हमारा objective था to inflict the limited damage in order to convey a message.
But giving a stern message that this is not acceptable.
Exactly.
This reminds me of a conversation Prime Minister Modi, before he became the Prime Minister, he was invited to Aapki Adalat, and Rajat Sharma asked him that had you been there at the time of 26/11, what would you have done? And he said, I would have attacked Pakistan. I wouldn't have taken any time. And when he was asked about the international pressure, so he said that international pressure बनाने की ताकत आज भारत में है. हम 120 करोड़ देशों को हम पे प्रेशर कैसे बना सकते हैं अगर हम सही चीज के लिए लड़ रहे हैं. So I think that's pretty much we are seeing on the ground. It did not remain a mere rhetoric. It is very much on the ground. Absolutely. So related to diplomacy is the fact that our neighbors, especially China, Pakistan, Bangladesh, China is not in favor of India's rise. They in fact want to keep helping Pakistan because they are like the best friends, if we say, in diplomacy, to keep India's rise in check. On the other hand, we are also seeing the United States of America warming up to Pakistan, which is very much visible. So in terms of India making great strides in showing its diplomatic prowess, but at the same time, we are having these troubled neighbors, as well as a US which is more in friendship with Pakistan. How do you see that?
The US-Pakistan friendship has been again a very contentious sort of a subject in foreign policy and international relations. The United States used Pakistan for its own purposes during the the Soviet-Afghan war. And the CIA, of course, funded a whole ecosystem of madrasas in Pakistan where they produced what are known as mujahideen to go and fight in Afghanistan. And once that was over, you had these surfeit of mujahideen with nothing to do. So you push them into Kashmir and you inflame that region. So that a part of the history, of course, is pretty clear. After Osama bin Laden was discovered in Pakistan, for a few years at least, America stepped back.
Yeah.
Although I think, track to diplomacy and, back channel conversations, keep continuing even when there is a formal stepping back.
Yeah.
And Pakistan has always been an asset for the US. Even when US comes and talks to India, forms Quad with India, Australia and others, and Japan, and, tries to be very friendly with India. India has, historically also, been very, careful about how to deal with America.
Yes.
And the reason is that we are aware that America at any time might cozy up to Pakistan, because Pakistan somehow is located strategically for America to be a very useful fool, let's say, who they can play whenever they want. And of course, now they wanted another useful fool in the same neighborhood, Bangladesh, and when Sheikh Hasina refused to give St. Martin's to them, they engineered the whole, regime change operation, as we saw in Bangladesh as well. So now Pakistan and Bangladesh have this nice little camaraderie, friendship going on in the region surrounding India. And America is watching it. America is very interested in what's going on in this region. It says very nice things about Modi being a great friend of Mr. Trump, and India being a great friend of the Americans. But the relationship between Pakistan and America never really went sour it probably was not in the public eye after the execution of Osama bin Laden and the whole story as it unfolded. But they have always acted together in the sense that America is always, the big brother in that relationship, and Pakistan has been the useful minion, let's say. So America, it's not new that they are cozying up to Pakistan. They have always cozied up to Pakistan, and now somehow, because Trump being Trump, Asim Munir and Shahbaz Sharif go and sell some fictitious rare earth
element
in Balochistan. Yes. And of course, the Americans don't know how Balochistan functions because they don't know anything except the way to their gas station. So therefore, it's really easy to kind of sort of mesmerize them or dazzle them with these rare earth minerals. So Reko Dik that they have been selling to America is in Balochistan, and it's under BLA's watch. China tried its best to get to Reko Dik, to the rare earth minerals. The BLA did not let it. The Chinese retreated, and now China is sort of slowly pulling itself out of Pakistan, as it were, primarily because these guys are permanent loan defaulters. Yes. They would take loans from the whole world and not return it to anybody. Right? So Chinese have realized that this is a bad investment. So we are not getting into this any further. Whatever we have invested, of course, you can't do much about that. Right. But the whole rare earth story that they sold to China, they are now selling to America. And Trump being Trump has bought that story for the time being. So we have to see how it unfolds. But Pakistan and America have always been, in the same page, on the same page and on the same side. So we have, India should really be mindful of this. I'm sure the people in the establishment are mindful of this position.
So it's not exactly, you can say, a strategic position. It's more like what we call in today's lingo a situationship. But the situations do last for long, then we
also,
see.
Geopolitically, Pakistan, I think, is more relevant for the US.
For the US.
To keep an eye on the Middle East as well.
Exactly.
And what is happening in Afghanistan, because they also have an eye on the on Afghanistan and that region. So geopolitically, so it is geopolitics, but at the same time, with this new Trumponomics, also we need to wait and watch.
So it's more like a great game being driven by US now, because what Britain we wanted to keep Pakistan as a kind of buffer state between the Soviets and the Indians, and US also using Pakistan for somewhat similar
ways.
So when we talk to diplomacy, and as we talked about China and US, when it comes to narratives, and because that's what matters the most, and as I said earlier, I remember whenever there was a conflict between India and Pakistan, especially the Western countries would come and say that both countries should exercise restraint. Today they are saying that India has the right to protect its country, to protect its sovereignty. So the narrative is changing somewhat in India's favor. By many countries we are saying they are supporting India, even many Islamic countries. Do you think that the narrative, India has been successful in changing the narrative for its own good?
To some extent, yes. And that has been possible because of Prime Minister Modi's efforts. The fact that he has positioned himself as a global leader, the fact that he has positioned India on the world map. No one considered India to be so important till, say, 2014. But because of that positioning, I feel a lot of we've actually received a lot of support from the Western countries. Everybody condemned the Pahalgam attacks. Even the Islamic countries condemned the Pahalgam attacks. I think because of Modi ji's efforts and because of not only his policy but also the fact that whatever his policies are, they're actionable. It's not just all talk. So because of that, people have started taking the West primarily has started taking India seriously. So to some extent, yes, we have been successful in changing the narrative, at least shifting the narrative to some extent. But more work needs to be done, I believe.
Of course.
And also the economic the economic position that India occupies today in the world, being the fourth largest economy and growing, and by perhaps the end of 2026 we are aiming to be the world's third largest economy.
Yes.
That has got a lot to do with the fact that India is taken more seriously on the world stage. Also, of course, the government, the Indian government has been putting in a lot of effort, like she said, into conveying a certain image of India and taking that image with them personally. So whenever Mr. Modi goes out, he takes the image of India, a resilient, a growing, and not an aggressive, but not a pushover India to the world. And that has changed the way in the world looks at us. That has also changed, interestingly, at the way Indians based out of India look at us. So there was a time when Indians in the diaspora would not really matter much.
Yeah.
But now now the Indian diaspora is a very large one, a growing diaspora, and it's actually the voice of the Hindus or the voice of the Indians matters in the world, in world politics as well. So that has also played a role. And the fact that Prime Minister Modi is very, very categorical about connecting people in the diaspora with their roots. So whenever he goes out, yesterday he was in South Africa, and he was there was a performance of the Girmitiya community, and they were singing a song in Bhojpuri, and Prime Minister enjoyed it, and he complimented them, and he said something to them in Hindi, and they had tears in their eyes. So we see this all the time.
Yes.
So it's a very emotional sort of a homecoming for them.
Right.
And these are people whose ancestors left India.
Yes.
And some of them have never been to India. So they see Mr. Modi as some sort of a link. Earlier, the link was cinema, India, Hindi cinema.
Yes.
But Hindi cinema, it has done more disservice to pushing the Indian narrative than a service to it. Right. But that's a completely different conversation, and we could have another podcast on it maybe. But even there, you see there is a shift. There is an alternative discourse or an alternative way of looking at questions and issues, particularly political questions and issues. And those productions or those films, OTT series, etc., are finding platforms.
Yes.
And they're finding viewers. So that cultural sort of production is also going out into the world. So soft power soft power can be exercised in many ways.
Right.
So up until now, till about 2014-ish, soft power that was going out was an aspirational India, yes, but an India which is, sort of laid back and is enjoying its song and dance routines, and that's it. Now the image of an India that is going out is that it is confronting its past. It is also reconnecting with its past. So you have a film like RRR, for instance. Yeah. Again, a film that has gotten global recognition. But a lot of the imagery and symbolism in that film is taken from our epics.
Yes.
Right? And from the Shastras. So there is acceptance in that way of this redefinition of us, who we are as Indians, our identity as Hindus, the civilization being important and the most core of the base and the core of our identity. So that perspective really has started going out into the world. I wouldn't say it has completely overshadowed the earlier narrative, the Slumdog Millionaire narrative.
Yeah.
But the civilizational resurgent India narrative is now sort of coming forward and is getting platforms and eyeballs, which is a good thing.
Of course. So one thing which caught my attention while reading your book was in the last chapter you mentioned about the spy ring in India. And we often talk of the homegrown terrorists. Now there's a lot of intelligence gathering against the terrorists. You can trace them. But when it comes to the spies, which appear to be completely, people like us, normal people doing a job, a government job or some private company, or how do how is that threat in a sense? Because I personally believe that's a much more difficult task to trace those people down. And yet we see that they played a very important role in the Pahalgam massacre, as well as even might have taken a role in the earlier earlier terror attacks as well. So how do you think we can deal with these homegrown spy agents?
I think vigilance is very important. We need to, and it's not just the government agencies, even civil society groups. The society in general, we need to keep a check on what our neighbor is doing. I mean, this is not, it's not a joke, it's not a meme that, we need to be like a CCTV camera.
Yeah.
We actually need to be like a CCTV camera. It is important because we need to know what our neighbor is doing. We need to know what people around are doing. And this person, Jyoti Malhotra, I mean, I don't think even her father or her siblings knew what she was doing and where was all that money coming from and how was she making all those trips to Pakistan and to other parts of the world. So it is very important for us as citizens of the country to be vigilant. And also, of course, the role of the government is very important. The intelligence agencies is very important. We have to be on our toes. And we do not have we don't have a choice.
Right.
So that is something that is very important. This is probably not the only spy ring that was busted. There are, I'm sure, many more people who are still, sending messages to Pakistan. They're working for Pakistan. So we need to first figure out who these people are. We need to figure out what is their modus operandi, and then we have to catch hold of them. We don't have a choice. This is for our safety. For the safety of our citizens, this needs to be done. So it has to be done at both the levels, at the level of the civil society and at the level of the intelligence agencies. Yes.
Also, I think human intelligence plays a great part. A lot of the, we are in the AI age, of course. We are, bang in the middle of the AI revolution. And we are using a lot of technology, to sort of for intelligence gathering and so on. But good old human intelligence, I think, can be a great asset. And for that, I think intelligence, like some of the older intelligence agencies, they still rely a lot on human intelligence and cultivating sources, cultivating their agents and people. So, it's more boots on the ground sort of an approach, but in a way that, of course, people don't know that you're a spy and you are working for Indian intelligence or whatever. But the kind of information that human intelligence agents can give you, you rarely get out of, tapping phone conversations because those can be very easily manipulated.
Right.
Or even CCTV cameras, people know what the blind spots are and they can do things, even though there are CCTV cameras, you know where the blind spots are. And a lot of crimes happen in those blind spot areas. But human intelligence, I think, is one thing that our intelligence community, I'm sure they're looking at it very, very closely and they're working on it. And a lot of what lot of the spies that were actually caught were caught because of human intelligence inputs. Yes. So that is that's like an age-old, time-tested method of intelligence gathering, and it really pays more dividends if you invest in it. So these are, again, the sleep act, we used to call them sleeper cells, but they don't seem to be sleeper cells anymore. Very active cells, right? Very actively performing the duties that have been given to them. And similarly, I'm sure there are spies there are people who are working for the ISI or passing on intelligence. And interestingly, some of these people might really have done it inadvertently. People just spend too much time on their mobile phones these days. So they are chatting with random people. Yes. And it's so easy to get into somebody's conversation by posing as somebody else. Yes. And then you are inadvertently sharing maps and blueprints and things like that with these people who you think are your friends. So technology has sort of advanced the ways in which they are gathering intelligence on us. So with technology, I think human intelligence will go a long way in complementing each other and bringing down these spy rings, because this is not that was not the only spy ring that was busted.
Correct.
There are probably many others across
course.
India.
In fact, they have been going on since decades.
Yeah.
I remember many movies I watched which were produced in earlier decades, and they did talk about the spy rings being operating in India with the connivance of the government officials, as has been the case.
Absolutely. Yes.
So my last question is related to the future. As you said at in the last part of the book, that Operation Sindoor is ongoing. Do you think there's likely to be more such Operation Sindoors? And is it something which will stop at any point of time? Would we Operation Sindoor 2.0, a 3.0, 4.0 or beyond? And what role do you think if the conflict escalates? Do you think it will become a full-blown war wherein Pakistan may be getting support from China as well?
So, as our Prime Minister very correctly said, that any act of violence or terror will be considered as an act of war against the Indian state. So, our intelligence agencies are still gathering evidence about Pakistan's links to the Delhi blast. But I think our armed forces are well prepared, and we've done a lot of military exercises on the borders. About Operation Sindoor 2.0, we'll know when it happens, because obviously that information only the military will have at this point. But yes, I think any mischief from Pakistan's side, I think now will not go unpunished.
Right.
So this is something that our government dispensation has very clearly stated, whether it is the Prime Minister or the Home Minister or the Raksha Mantri, even Yogi Adityanath ji, very clearly in a lot of political rallies also it has been stated. So it will not go unpunished. But we need to wait and watch. We need to see whether Operation Sindoor 2.0 actually happens and when it happens. The Pakistani media is very scared. And if we keep watching these news channels, and they know something is coming, because they also know that their military establishment is not going to stop.
Yes.
And they are going to engineer many more attacks, many more terror attacks in India. So they are scared, they are petrified. We are prepared, and we just need to wait and watch when the second part of Operation Sindoor actually happens.
Right.
So to answer your question about whether there will be a conventional war, I think we are in an era of small hot wars, rather than a big world war, let's say, or a big war. So there is a conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Ongoing. Israel and Gaza just stopped, and we don't know for how long. Right. So there are these conflict areas. There are conflicts taking place within countries, between countries. So
Iran and Israel.
Iran-Israel conflict. Right. So there are several small conflicts taking place around the world instead of this one big
war.
Third World War, as people like to call it. But I don't see a third world war coming. What I see is that if we are pushed to it, we might engage with Pakistan in a conventional war. But Pakistan might not be able to sustain in a conventional war. So I doubt they would initiate one. They are mischievous in that way. So they will do something or the other. So we should be well prepared. We are definitely well prepared for Operation 2.0. Now, what form it will take, we just have to wait and watch whether it will be, there have been indications that it might be a naval assault. There are indications that it might be a full-on military, like a boots on the ground sort of an approach with tanks rolling over and things like that. But exactly what will happen is hard to say at the point. It might be a tri-forces operation like what we had in Operation Sindoor. Of course, the Navy was on full alert and they really didn't have to do much during this operation. But who is to say? I mean, in the next one, perhaps they would play a larger role. So any mischief by Pakistan will not go unpunished. So that, of course, has been well understood, I think, by the rest of the world as well. So I'm not sure what their international friends are advising them to do. But knowing Pakistan and Pakistani military state, they are not going to stop at this.
Right.
So the Indian military establishment, of course, is very well prepared with all the acquisitions going on. We are, in fact, manufacturing now. We are one of the biggest defense manufacturers in the world. We are not only making in India, but also selling to other parts of the world. So in that regard, I think we are pretty well placed to address any eventuality. But then, considering that we have very mischievous and a very, very diabolical neighbor, I wouldn't put it past them to start this time from the Eastern Front or do something from the Eastern Front. There has been a lot of talk about Eastern Front being activated, but we just have to wait and watch. The chicken's neck area primarily. So we just have to wait and watch.
Right.
And there's been a lot of camaraderie between Pakistan and Bangladesh of late. So we need to wait and watch.
Right. So well, let's end this on an optimistic note. Let's hope that whatever happens, it's for the benefit of India. We are a country which is growing, doing very well on economic front as on many other fronts, and we continue doing that way. So Chandni, Roshni, thank you very much for the session. I think it was like an eye-opener for many. It was, I would say, a masterclass in geopolitics and history. At a personal level, I really enjoyed reading your book. I think the way you covered Pakistan's history, the way you covered Operation Sindoor, as well as what the future can bring. I think all of it's definitely making it a wonderful read. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you,
so much.
Abhishek. Thank you.